Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. Today, we are presenting webinar on how to prevent burnout, organized by Applied Science and Humanities Department of Farul Polytechnic Institute, Farul University. The main agenda of this webinar is to understand about burnout and what are the signs, causes, and how can we avoid burning out when pursuing our mission. I, Vaishali Nathwani, would like to introduce the speaker of today's webinar, Davida Ginter from Israel. She is a co-founder and CEO of Enkindle Global, an organization that leads global efforts to eliminate burnout. She is the author of the book Burnout Won't Get You There, which features interviews and conversations with worldwide leaders and change makers. She is a participatory leadership facilitator and a nonviolent communication trainer with BA in sociology and journalism and MSc in strategic leadership towards sustainability. She believes in leadership that grows from the bottom up and believes in taking initiatives and responsibilities to shape up life and work. She feels like her whole life has led her to this unique mission for sharing with people everything that she knows and preventing burnout while leading for a better world. She has given workshops in countries like Israel, Sweden, Poland, Italy, etc. It's a privilege to welcome you, ma'am, here, and you can start with the session.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here today, and thank you for the kind invitation and a warm welcome. I just start with showing the presentation and take it from there. Okay. As you probably already have the feeling, we are going to focus today on burnout, but also how to prevent burnout. So we're going to take this topic into a practical place. But first, we want to understand what burnout is. How does it feel like? What causes that? So we get a good picture of the topic before we dive into solutions. And I think that one of the best ways that I'm familiar with to understand burnout is to imagine those flights on an airplane. I know it has been a while since we all been to an airplane since COVID, but if you remember those flights, one of the first instructions that we are given while sitting there in an airplane is put your oxygen mask first before assisting any of the other passengers. And the reason why we are told that is because we can't help others when we are lacking the energy, the oxygen, the resources. And when we are depleted of our energy, obviously we cannot assist anyone else. So basically, the way to avoid burnout would be to take good self-care. But just to say that self-care is not egoistic, it's actually coming from a reason that we can thrive while doing our work and also be able to serve other people, to help other people. So this is the topic that we're basically going to cover in today's session. What is burnout and then how to prevent it. But first, to understand why it's so important to prevent burnout before hitting the wall. And burnout is a big topic. And to understand that, we need to uncover some of the truth around it. And the first one is to understand actually that stress and burnout are not the same. And before that, I want to take you shortly through the journey that I have been working with this topic of burnout. And I have been working with leaders, sustainability practitioners, change makers. And while doing that, while working with those leaders, I noticed so many of them get stressed out and then burned out. And I wanted to understand why. Why are people who are so committed to their mission and help other people forget to take self-care, forget to sustain themselves in that process. So I went out to interview people in different places, in different continents in the world. That's what led me to write the book, but also I was very curious to understand why and what's going on there. And the biggest realization that I had while researching this topic of burnout is that, yes, it's a global phenomenon. So it's basically everywhere, and it's cross-cultural in the sense that there's no place or culture where burnout has not occurred there. And even if the causes are a bit different, it basically looks and feel the same everywhere in the world. So when I interviewed a person from Sweden who told me that after his burnout, he was in bed for 2 months. And then I interviewed a lady from South America, and she told me a very similar story, how she had to stay at home and then in bed for several months after her burnout. I felt those are the same, and those are people from different parts of the world. So it's cross-cultural, it's basically a global phenomenon, and it's cross-sectoral, which is to say that it occurs in different industries, in different sectors, in different workplaces. And the reason why we call it a phenomenon is because we know now that burnout is not just random cases happening to random people. We see it everywhere because we have a systemic problem, but it could also be a systemic solution. And so, as I said, let's understand what it is. And some people think of burnout the same as stress, but those are actually not the same at all. Stress and burnout are different. Stress actually by itself is not a negative thing at all. There is research showing that stress could be a positive thing when it pushes us forward to pursue our mission, because it creates this adrenaline, this sense that we are chasing something. However, when stress is not being managed well, and when it occurs every day, all the time, constantly, then we are overwhelmed by stress. Then we perceive stress as feeling stressful. We feel this anxiety, and this is what leads to burnout. And then what happens is this loop that accumulated stress becomes burnout, but also when we are burnt out, we are feeling more stress. This is actually a very new research published only a few months ago, that burnout in turn influences stress in this loop that we can feel. So if stress and burnout are not the same, what is burnout? And so in 2019, the World Health Organization has defined for the first time burnout. They gave it a formal definition and classified it under the list of diseases. So burnout is not a disease, it's a disorder, it's a syndrome, but it's still the first time it has been recognized by the World Health Organization. And this is how they defined it. It's a syndrome results from chronic workplace stress. As we said, stress that is chronic, that is constant, and happens, which relates to work, and has not been successfully managed, in the sense that not only occurs every day, but we are not equipped to deal well with this stress. And then, as we said, it's accumulated and becomes burnout. And we can know this burnout by 3 main signs. And this is really, really important to be aware of those signs, either for yourselves or for others. And the first time is that if we feel that our energy is depleted, that we are lacking this energy to keep functioning, to keep doing our work, maybe even in personal life. And also we feel exhausted. And I'm not talking about we feel tired every now and then, which is totally legitimate and normal. We feel exhausted all the time. I've interviewed people who told me, we didn't get it at first. We slept good at night. We slept 8 hours a night. And we still woke up tired, exhausted every day. And the reason for that is that because they have been emotionally exhausted, and that was translated to physical tiredness, and that was burnout. The second sign is that when we feel mentally distanced from our work, we can feel, negative or cynical towards the work that we do, the mission, the project, our colleagues, the people that we're working with, maybe our boss. So when everyone feels a bit, negative every now and then towards what we do. But when it happens all the time, constantly, that's a big red flag sign that we might be approaching burnout. And the third sign is a lack or reduced professional efficacy, which means that we feel that we are not functioning well. We feel that our ability to perform our work has been reduced. And that is, by the way, affecting harmfully our sense of self-worth. So now that we have a better picture of what is burnout, actually, let's understand what causes it. And I want to show you 6 categories of the main causes of burnout. This is research done by one of the leading professor of burnout in the world, experts of burnout, Professor Christina Maslach from Berkeley, California. And her team categorized the causes of burnout into 6 main areas. One is workload, but it's not the workload as we think of. So it's not that if we work many hours, we put a lot of time on a project or in our work, we get burnt out. Not at all. This is about the gap between the workload, the requirements, and our ability to meet those requirements. So I know many people who work long hours and thrive while they work, while others work just a few hours and actually are on the verge of burnout. And the difference is that when the workload is big and also we are not equipped to deal with that, maybe we lack the resources or the system support, then we might approach burnout. So it's the gap between the workload and our ability to perform that. Second is our sense of control. Do we have control of our work? Do we have the autonomy to make decisions, to perform our work? Because when we don't feel that we have control, when we feel we are micromanaged by our boss or others, then it's a main cause that could lead to burnout. Next one is reward. And I'm sure that you can relate to this feeling because so many people have experienced that at least once in their life. When we put a lot of effort and we feel that we are not rewarded appropriately for, what we have put in. And if that happens, every once and then, that's not a problem. But when it happens constantly and we feel that we are constantly not rewarded for our work, that's a big risk. That's a major cause of burnout. And I'm not just talking about financial reward. This could also be appreciation, positive feedback, knowing that someone values our work. From there, let's talk about community. And this is to say work environment. When we feel disconnected from the work environment, from our colleagues, when we feel, again, that we don't have the support, when we constantly encounter conflicts, lack of trust, broken communication with the people we are working with on a mission, that's, again, a very, very common cause for burnout. From there, let's talk about fairness. This is when we feel discriminated at work, or maybe we feel there's a lack of equality there on how the work is being divided, how the workload is being distributed. And that feels like lack of fairness, basically, which could be, let's face it, very, very frustrating, especially over time. And lastly is the sense of values and meaning. And when we feel that we don't work towards a meaningful cause, that's a feeling of misalignment between our values and what we consider as meaningful, misalignment between that and what the workplace or the system or the organization is actually promoting. Maybe there's some unethical stuff going on there. Maybe it's about just, I don't know what it is, but we feel that we can no longer work on these causes. And, all of this to understand what could cause burnout, but also to give us a sense of how to shift it. And we will talk about it when we cover how to prevent burnout. So have this in mind. What are the problems? What are the causes when we talk about solutions? I want to add to those some of my research. I want to add some of the additional layers that when we face them actually enhance the problem and adds more attention to the already stressful situation and burnout. And the first one is the feeling of loneliness. And that's basically when we feel alone in this situation, that we feel we are the only ones struggling with it. And, we're sitting there here calmly, rationally, and we think we know we are never alone, right? There's always someone else that we can contact, or there's always someone else who's struggling with something very similar, a similar challenge. But when we are in a situation of approaching burnout, we can feel very much alone. And loneliness by itself adds another layer of inner pressure when we need to deal with a lot of stress. So be aware of this feeling of loneliness and how can we shift that. From there, bottling up struggles and maybe challenges and fears and other emotions. And that's, by the way, a very common problem for entrepreneurs, founders, business owners, leaders. And why is that? Is because many people, and they have shared this with me in interviews and in informal conversations, they feel that they cannot share their struggles and they need to bottle them up because they're afraid to appear weak. When you are the leader, you're supposed to be the smartest, the strongest person in the room, but not exactly. That's a lot of pressure. And that's more than okay to share our challenges and reach out for help. And we will talk about it in the solutions. But first, to understand the problem here. When we bottle up our struggles and other emotions and challenges and how to deal with everything. And I want to also mention guilt and shame as two other additional layers that could worsen pretty much every problem. And the relation to burnout is that when people are afraid or shying away from talking about their struggles or their burnout, they also could feel shame around it, even though we know now it's a global phenomenon that many are struggling with. And it also has a lot to do with how we perceive failure. So everyone fails at some point, right? We all make mistakes. Some of our projects will fail. That's part of life. That's an inevitable part of life. But when we accidentally correlate failure with our identity, so instead of looking at a mission and say, okay, so that failed, instead of doing that, we say, we have failed. We are the failure. That's a very harmful place to be. I specifically remember one interview with a sustainability practitioner from Australia, James. And James told me, I felt guilty every time my mission to promote environmental sustainability failed. And at some point, I kept saying that I'm not doing enough, and I started thinking I am not enough. And that's what led him to get burnt out. And we can see how important it is to remove the shame and guilt around our mistakes, because that's a major cause of burnout that we would like to avoid. Well, uncertainty, and what can I say? A year ago, I needed to explain uncertainty. Now, under COVID, I think we all understand it so well. That feeling that we can't predict the future, the feeling that the present is uncertain. But we also know now, maybe that's one of the biggest lessons of COVID, is that uncertainty is, again, part of life. So the big key here, the big issue is not how to remove uncertainty. The key here is to understand how to deal with uncertainty, how not to let uncertainty consume us. We can't always control the situation, but we can understand that uncertainty is part of it and be equipped. The problem is, of course, when people are consumed or stressed by uncertainty, that adds another layer of stress to already a stressful situation, which could lead to burnout, and that's what we want to avoid. So it's about learning to deal with the uncertainty. And I promise we will cover some solutions. So we are still figuring out the problem before jumping into practices. And lastly, but so importantly, is competition and comparison. And comparison and competition, of course, they're not new to our world. However, in recent years, they have become even a bigger problem because of the internet and social media. So basically, I can, scroll down my feed and see how all the people around there are so successful, right? Because this is what we show on social media. But of course, we don't know the backstory of people. But when we fall into this trap of comparison and we start thinking, oh, everyone is so successful, everyone just, nailed it, everyone got it, and I haven't, that's a very negative and hard. That's a hard feeling to be in. And that's a loop. The more we dive into this comparison with others, the more stressed we become. And then it becomes, as we said, chronic, which could lead to burnout. So be aware of those as well. And sometimes it's hard to deal with those, but we just want to observe them and understand what's going on for us. And from there, we can move out from these situations. And now we are getting to it. And I bet you ask yourself, all right, so the biggest question of all, how do we start? Or how do we prevent burnout? And every time I get asked this question, and I get asked this a lot. And I've been asked, so what's your solution to burnout? Can you give us a formula? Can you give us a recipe? I say, I'm sorry, but no. First, because there isn't a solution to burnout. There isn't a single solution. There are many. There's a variety of practices, approaches, mindsets, different tools that we can learn and practice to avoid burnout way before hitting the wall. So the first answer, there isn't a single solution. But secondly, maybe even more important, is that because those practices are highly personal, very individual. So what works for me will not necessarily work for you. We are all unique. We are all individual people with different preferences, characteristics, set of values. So I'm not saying don't take advice, don't be inspired by people, but what you're reading, but what you're listening to, this is great. Go and seek for advice. This is wonderful. However, filter this advice through your personal lens, your personal values, and your personal preferences. And whichever practice or advice that you test and try, just observe, does it serve me in the best possible way, and not necessarily what it does to others. So I really want to encourage you to think of burnout prevention in a highly personal way that suits you the most, and not necessarily what is working for other people. So how do we approach burnout prevention? What are the practices? I know many people, probably you know some as well, who have this wonderful methodology. They work really hard. They really burn themselves throughout the year, and then they go to a vacation because they say to themselves, so what's the problem? I can work hard. I can absorb all the disrespect, all the conflicts, everything. I can take more missions, squeeze more tasks into my day, Because what's the problem? I can just go for my 2 weeks vacation in 2 months and everything will be fine. Well, that's a problem, and you know that, right? Because when we come back from this vacation, from this retreat, we go back to the very same routine that has contributed to our burnout. So that's not a solution that addresses the core problem. And we have mentioned the problem. If we have conflicts at work, no vacation will solve that. If we feel that there is lack of fairness there, right? Or that we don't have a good community at work, or that we are lonely, no retreat will address those problems. So what we do want to create is something else. We want to redesign our routines at work and in life. We want to reprioritize our choices. We want to realign what we're working on with our values and principles and who we really are. We want to create a routine of constant well-being. So instead of being in a constant stress that could lead to chronic stress and then to burnout, we want to create a constant well-being in our routines. So now when we understand that it's not about running away for a retreat, it's about creating a routine of well-being, right? There are many solutions, you need to choose one. Now we can actually talk about those approaches and those practices. And I promise to share with you quite a few, and the rest you can go and explore because there are so many. And my way of doing that is to show you some key approaches, and then we break them down into practices. And those approaches are actually common to most people because they are approaches, not the specific practices. So, for example, connecting. We are social creatures. We need others in our lives. It doesn't have to be many others, right? We can just have 1 or 2 people that we really trust that will have our back. But we do need to connect with others to increase our sense of well-being. And that means too, and now I'm getting into practices, reach out actively for support, maybe for advice. And sometimes we don't need advice. Sometimes we just want to be heard by others. You can reach out for mentorships. I've interviewed mentors because I want to know the part of mentorship in well-being. But what was interesting there to reveal is that when I interviewed mentors, they have told me, we love it when people come to ask for advice because we feel valued. We feel that we are giving value, we feel meaningful. So I know that many people are afraid to approach mentors for support or advice, but they actually want to be approached. So I encourage you to actively build your supporting systems, to have someone you can speak to connect to others. It could be even just a friend, but just knowing that you are not alone with your challenges, because we all experience those challenges. I want to talk about pausing judgment as a key approach. And what do I mean by that? So as humans, we have the tendency to judge either others or ourselves, right? But it's not inevitable. We can practice pausing that judgment. Because when we constantly judge ourselves, as we said before, we judge ourselves for our mistakes and failures. We judge ourselves for things we have said, and we might regret them. But when we constantly judge ourselves for how we do our work or how we interact in life, we are in a very harmful loop there. So what we do want to do here is to pause that judgment. When it starts, to just pause there, observe it, and then we are able to remove some of the judgment. Now, specific practices could be to journal that, to observe ourselves for a period of time and write down what is happening to us, and start finding those little tools and techniques to pause that judgment when towards ourselves or to others. And that's closely is related to the next key approach, which is the self-empathy and setting boundaries. Now, self-empathy is basically about accepting ourselves as we are, with our imperfections. People who are very likely to burn out are people who constantly seek perfection, even though we know rationally that life is not perfect. And we are beautifully imperfect people. So self-empathy is about accepting ourselves as we are. I'm not saying not to strive for improvement. I am saying to give ourselves some slack when we are imperfect. And it's also closely related to setting boundaries. And I know, and this is a very personal issue and example, I've been struggling for years with setting those boundaries, knowing when to say no, how to say no. I wanted to do it all. I was afraid to lose opportunities. So I basically said yes to everything. But then where's my well-being in that if we never set clear boundaries, right? So, and this is not about being unkind. You can be very, very kind and still set your own boundaries. Learn, practice how to say no, thank you. How to pause disrespect from other people at work or again in personal interactions. This is really important for high achievers, people who are at work, high achievers, right? We want to do more, we want to achieve more, and some of it is great. We are committed to what we do. But when we don't set those self-boundaries, we are very likely to be energy depleted, exhausted, and then burned out in that process. And of course, balance, and in this case, personal balance. And I don't want to talk about work-life balance because, to be honest, these days, it's not exactly about separating work from life. Sometimes those blend together, and that's fine. That's, legitimate. I want to talk about personal balance. And this is really important. I want to pause on that for a few minutes now. Creating a personal balance is basically asking yourself, what are my needs? What am I lacking now in my routines, either at work or in life again? What am I lacking now that I need to complement? So I'm creating this balance. And I will give a few examples. Let's say that I work all day in a very noisy and hectic environment with many people. It's very noisy there. I might want to balance that after work with some quiet time with myself or maybe with my partner, my family. Or the other way around. If I work all day alone in front of the screen, just myself and me, this is great, but it's very quiet there. I might want to balance that with socializing after work, with, again, connecting with other people. Or what if my routine is very dynamic? I might want to balance that with some stillness, or the other way around. If I'm being very still, like in one place all day long, I might want to balance that with movement. It could be exercises, hiking in nature, whatever it is. You want to find your own balance that complements, that meets your needs, that complements your routines. This is what I'm saying about personal balance. This is my point about you do you and not blindly follow what suits others. And as you can see here from all those approaches, you need to go through some self-exploration in this process. I never say it's going to be easy. But burnout prevention and cultivation of well-being starts with self-exploration. And it's also continuous with consistency. You want to be very, very consistent with your practice, right? So the same as we don't want constant stress, we want consistency of practice of well-being. If you, for example, decided to start journaling to enhance your well-being. Yes, journaling contributes to well-being. You want to be consistent with it, because if you just do it for a week, that won't do the work. If you are starting practicing gratitude, another key practice for well-being, you want to be consistent, because one day of gratitude is nice, but it's not going to build you a routine of well-being. I want to wrap up this part of the presentation. Before we move on to Q&As in a few short minutes, I want to wrap up with a suggested exercise for you. And this exercise is taken from the field of appreciative inquiry, which basically say, let's explore what went well. Sometimes when we are given feedback, we look for the problems to learn from them. This is nice. I want to talk about the positive stuff. I want to learn from success, and I want to show you how. I want you to do appreciative inquiry for yourself and basically start with the question. Think about a time when it was very, very stressful and you handled that well. So think about that time. I don't know what happened there. I don't know what was your challenge. It was stressful. However, you managed it. You were on top. You did something very, very well there. And now that you have this situation, when you have this situation, I want you to ask yourself the following questions. And yes, I encourage you to write down your answers. You don't have to, but you are really encouraged to do it, because when we write down, we have more clarity that comes up from or through writing. So once you have a situation, ask yourself the following questions. What happened there? First, just describe the details. When you write them down, new details will come up from your memory. You will notice that. What happened there? Second, what went well? Specifically, focus, like we said, on the positive things. Focus on the success. What really went well, despite the stress, despite the adversity or the challenge. Number three, how did you handle that? So what was your role in that situation? What did you do to manage that stress? What did you come up with? And then number four, what helped you to deal with what happened there? It could be maybe a specific practice. It could be maybe a method, maybe an action that you took, or it could be another person who helped you to deal with it. I want you to be very, very specific, describing, finding what helped you to manage that stressful situation. And then, of course, what can you learn from that? And the reason why we are doing this exercise, using appreciative inquiry, learning from success, is because now you have a map that could help you deal with situations next time that are not the same, but still stressful, and you can take the same techniques that helped you last time and use that map, use those clues next time that you are facing adversity. Because let's say, for example, that you have found that what helped you was to, take some deep breath, write down the problem, call a friend, and only then approach the situation. I'm just, giving some random examples. It could be very different. But now you have the clues of what is helpful for you in stressful situations. For other people, it could be walk away from the situation, go for a walk and come back when they're calmer. For some people, it could be playing music. I've heard this. People starting to play music, it evolves their creative side in them, and then they can approach a situation. Again, this is very personal. I want you to exercise that. I want you to understand yourself in your resilience in the situation of stress. Because if we can avoid constant stress, we can avoid burnout. And I think this is the perfect time to wrap up this part, to give you my contact details, just if you want to explore more or to ask afterwards questions, or to be in touch, or to read the book. Burning Out won't get you there. I just want you to have access. I'm always available to reply questions. And in a short minute, I'm going to stop the presentation, and we're going to move to Q&As to see what comes up to you. What are your reflections? What are your thoughts? What you would like to ask? So thank you for listening to this part. Okay.
Thank you so much for this beautiful presentation, ma'am.
My pleasure.
Ma'am, the first question is, how can we prevent burnout at workplace?
The workplace. That's a very important question, first of all, because this is usually where burnout happens. How can we prevent it? So I'll say that my reply is divided into two. First is what we can do from our part, and second is what we need to ask the organization to do. So if we start from ourselves, it will be to be very clear about our goals and our needs. What do we need to perform our work, right? What is the problems that we are facing? We can list those down. We need to first be very, very clear about ourselves. And the second part is, okay, so what do we do in the organizational level? And I would say that most of the times, 99% of the time, it's about going and have a very candid, open conversation with either our colleagues or our boss, managers, leaders. And the reason I'm saying that is, well, there are many reasons, but part of them are, first, we might be not the only ones struggling with that. Oftentimes you go and maybe our colleagues is having the same issues, and we can just go and solve them together. Secondly, sometimes our managers are not even aware of our challenges. They think that everything is pretty much okay because we have put this nice face that everything is okay. But when we communicate those problems, we can solve or help get the support to solve them in many of the cases. And I can already see the follow-up questions. What if it doesn't help? What if the leaders or the managers can't fix the problem? In that case, I will suggest to keep, first of all, to understand what's within our control and what isn't. Maybe it's something we can change in ourselves, then that's in our control, and some isn't. So we can encourage more open conversations. We can go several colleagues together to our boss to talk about it. We can offer solutions, by the way. It's not always our responsibility, but we can come to our managers and say, so listen, this is, in my opinion, what isn't working, but I'm also suggesting to shift that. Because this is already give the leaders a sense of, all right, so these people are serious about the situation, and we do want to support them. So it goes down back again to be very open and honest with our communication, but also honest with ourselves, and be very clear about what we need and communicate that.
So we need to communicate first.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. Okay, ma'am. What are the relaxation techniques that would help to cope up with this burnout situation?
Relaxation techniques. So there are many. I will name a few, and then it's up to you to test what's working for you. There's all the area of mindfulness. It could be meditations, and it could be even physical practices such as yoga or others. It could be connecting with nature. I know that many people, it has been shown in the research time and again, that when we go out in nature, even for a few minutes, even during the day, if it's possible to have your break outside, this is wonderful. I know it's not always possible, but we can try. And nature by itself is a very relaxing, being in the outdoors could be very relaxing. There's also breath work, which is to learn how to breathe in a very calming and nourishing way. So there's a lot of work we can learn on how to breathe in a more intentional way. So not just to breathe to survive, but really to be very intentional about that. And I will also add again a lot of contemplative practices, which is the journaling, the self-reflection, to be with ourselves. This is also very relaxing to go internally, and then we reconnect to ourselves, and by that we can reconnect to others. So we said mindfulness, meditations, being in the outdoors, nature, breath, and contemplative practices from journaling through reflection.
Okay. Is there any time or duration that burst out can last?
Well, I'm afraid there isn't an accurate answer to that because it's so personal. Some people I've interviewed have been through a very intense and short period of time, like a very intense month. They were burnt out, they went for recovery, that went well. While other people who I'm still in touch with, because I think this is really interesting to understand, it took them 2 years of being in a situation when they didn't function well. I'm talking about people who their memory got a bit hurt, who were physically suffering, some were hospitalized, and it took them 2 years to recover. So there isn't like a right answer that it's varied from one person to another. I guess the lesson here is to fix the problem like really before it starts or when the first signs appeared. So please don't wait with that. This is your health, physical and emotional health. Just start whenever you are ready to do that.
Yes, so I think it depends on the situation and person to person, right?
Absolutely, you nailed it. Yeah.
And you told that it should be seen fast, right? You should communicate with the first stage only. So which will be the first sign according to you that this is a sign or this is a starting point of burnout?
So any one of the 3 signs that we mentioned, I will remind them. That's depleted energy and exhaustion. When we feel exhausted, but not just today I'm tired, like every day. So it's repetitive, exhaustion and energy. The second one is that when you feel negative and very cynical. And again, it's not that, okay, today I'm not feeling so good. I'm talking about we feel annoyed all the time. That's a red flag there, right? Like for a whole month, I'm going to work or meeting my colleagues and everything just pissed me off. That's a sign there. And the third one is that we feel less efficient, less productive. But again, over time, any one of those signs should be a clear statement for us to go and check what's the problem there.
You told us the questions that we should ask ourselves, right? Some of 5 or 6 questions to avoid burnout. So, is it visible to think the questions or note it down? What is the right way?
I'd say whatever suits you. You can absolutely think about it or talk to another person about it. By the way, it's a nice exercise to do with a friend. I like doing this with actually one of my biggest, closest friend and mentor. It's really helpful. So you can do it with yourself in your head. You can do it with another person. The reason why I am encouraging you to write down, you don't have to do it. The reason why I'm encouraging is because it has been shown in research that when we write down our thoughts and emotions and reflections, more comes up. Just more, something happens there in the process of writing that brings to the surface more things. So it's an encouragement. You don't have to write it down. Just, you can just try and test it.
I agree with that, ma'am, because my husband also has a habit of writing every morning, and he writes down all the things that has happened in last night or something. But I think it is quite truthful to write it down.
I like the example that you gave because this is exactly what I'm talking about, building a routine of well-being. So not just every now and then, like have a very consistent habit. Whichever habit, you can go for a jog every day, it doesn't matter. As long as it's consistent and contributes to your well-being.
And how can we stop emotional burnout?
Burnout is always emotional. Burnout is also emotional. How can we stop that? By everything we just shared. Starting with connecting with other people, not judging ourselves. Don't beat yourself up for those feelings. Instead, communicate them. Write them down. Go for a long walk to understand what's going on. I think that the biggest problem is that people keep the inner chatter, like the inner conversation about why am I keep feeling that? Why am I keep thinking that? Because that's human. But what we want to do is pause and observe that in a more calm way, to step away for a minute from the situation, from the stressful situation. It will still be emotional, but in a healthier way. We need to find our coping mechanism to not get stuck in that spiral, in that loop, but to communicate it in a healthy way.
But I think sharing with someone is sometimes what we can say, that it is negative also, I think.
It could be if we don't get the support that we need. I'd say if you are sharing with someone and they judge you,
yes, exactly.
Choose another person. Yeah.
So I think writing is the best way, and to share with ourselves and cope up with that thing. It is good, I think.
Yeah, it's both. It's finding the inner support system, but also the external support system. There's always a person. It doesn't have to be our closest friend. It could be someone from work. There's always a person that when we talk to, we feel alive, right? There's always one person that when we talk to, they really listen to us without judgment. This is the person you want to share with.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much, ma'am, for giving us your valuable time. And
thank you very much for the questions
now. Yes.
Great.
I would like to thank you, the head of our department, Mr. Hemal Patel, sir, the HR of our institute, Professor Jatin Vaidya, sir, and academic director, Dr. Mahesh Bhatt, sir, and president of our university, Dr. Devanshu Patel, sir, for motivating and supporting us continuously. I would also like to thank you, all the participants who assembled here today for this beautiful webinar. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.